afternoon, and welcome to our latest episode of ITDUG Documentation Czar. Today, I am with Alan Edwards, who will be joining me for this call to dive into what are they doing.
I can't wait.
So a little about me. I am a seasoned leader with Gozinta, Eureka, service delivery expert, documentation process. Alan is a distinguished author, process consultant.
Hey guys, I forgot Brendan was counting on me to change the slides, so we're catching up. Almost there.
All right. So let's dive right into it. What is a documentation czar? Today we're going to be talking about the process review. What is a documentation czar? Importance of creating a documentation committee, and who is the right fit for the czar?
Yeah, and Brendan, I'm excited about this topic because we've talked a lot in the past about the process, and even a little bit about the committee. But we get asked a lot, who is this person? But I do need to do a little bit of review so we see how this fits into the bigger picture first. So you guys have heard about this disease, LBS. It affects millions of Americans and across the world. It's a terrible disease, which LBS stands for leaky bucket syndrome. Let me give you a quick illustration of what that is. You might be a solopreneur at first, and you train the next person, and human nature, right? You train that person, they mishear some things, they develop some new habits, good or bad, they're different, right? That's the key. Their bucket leaks a little bit. And as you continue to scale, that person passes their bucket of knowledge down to the next person. And this cycle continues until, for you Star Trek fans, the red shirt guy is no bueno. He's not happy, you're not happy, nobody's happy. And this is what we want to fix. And what we've learned is that there are 4 ways to fix the leaky bucket. I use fix loosely because you can't actually plug the holes. We're humans, not robots, not computers. Our bucket is always going to be leaky, but we can put knowledge in the bucket continuously. KPIs do that. Coaching does that. Our onboarding fills the bucket initially. But my favorite, as you might have guessed, is process, because process is that waterfall of knowledge that continuously fills that bucket. And that's why process is important. And I want us to be quickly aware of that. Now, I do want to do 3 quick definitions. So we use these words a lot in here. Like I've always asked, what is a process? It's just a series of actions that leads to a specific result. Similarly, because you'll hear me interchange these words, documentation and process. The difference is documentation is you're writing it down. But anything you write down that's called documentation is simply a decision you've made. So you're documenting the decision you made, so we're all on the same page. So how you do something is a process. Deciding how we're going to do it is writing it down so we can all see it. And a lot of times you'll hear us talk about a culture of process or company culture. I was fascinated by this term because I realized when I was writing the book, Processing the Other P Word, I didn't actually know what it meant. I had this understanding, but I didn't know. And I looked it up, and I love the definition. The widely accepted way of doing something of a particular group of people. So business culture, that's your group of people. And the accepted way of doing things to me would be the processes that you document. That's a culture of documentation. Simple.
That culture is hard to build. But once you get there,
yeah. And I think if you put these 3 things together, that's how you build it, right? By understanding that you have a written agreement what a process is.
Totally agree.
Yeah. So right before we get into documentations are, first off, we reviewed the process in a lot of other videos. Please look it up on YouTube/EurekaProcess.com. Sorry, YouTube/EurekaProcess. Look up our ITDUG playlist. You'll find several presentations on the process. But at a very high level, it's the why behind your processes. It's the blueprint so that all the people can work together in their separate areas and still build the same house. That's the purpose of the process. It's where it agrees on how you store your written decisions, where you store them, when you store them. And my favorite is who's doing it, which we are going to answer that today. So before we do that, what czar are they even doing? Brendan knows a lot of people even in there to make it absurd. And it was actually Brendan who helped me realize this. I'm going to turn the floor over to Brendan for a second to describe this. But really, the one task a Documentation Czar is to execute the documentation review cycle. Now, we did review this. I think, was it last month, Brendan, the documentation review cycle?
Yes.
Also, there's a more detailed video, but let's do a very high level. So, Brendan, give us the high level on this.
So your documentation review cycle has 4 parts. To create and edit, which is where we are going to draft, perform an internal review, do the content review, verify the format, and make sure that it's all edited. Then we go to the approve and publish. This is where the documentations may or may not come into place depending on the maturity of the documentation. We want to do a final review, a compliance check. So did it meet the organizational standards that we have set forth in the process? We want to publish the process, the knowledge base article, and then notify your team that the process has changed, which we're going to get into later in this webinar of how to do that. I can't understate this and overstate this enough. Feedback. We have to collect feedback. Users' feedback, teams' feedback. The feedback is what makes this process work. If something's not working, the process needs to be changed. Everybody's responsible for changing it. And we want to track metrics. Is this article usage being used? Are there, for knowledge-based article wise, are there thumbs up, thumbs down? Then we go to the review cycle where we review and revise our knowledge-based articles for process documentation. Altogether, we have the process review cycle in one plain little format here. But when done right with the Documentation Czar, it makes this whole process a lot easier.
And you finally have that one throat to choke, right? That one person who's accountable to this process. And it's, it fits in a slide. It can't be hard, right? So now the question I get asked the most is, who's the czar? And many times I heard the recommendation like, oh, we're going to have our sysadmin who they have the admin keys to ITDUG. We're going to make them the czar. And that might line up, but that is not by nature the right person to assign to this. Just like many of us are champions of content and we don't understand all the underlying systems, we might not even have the rights, and that's okay that they're separate. Similarly, people, especially in an IT world, they want to put their highest technical skill on the job because they know all the ins and outs of all the processes. Well, first off, not all processes are technical. Second of all, they might not be trained or understand that documentation review cycle. But what they are responsible for is quite simply process adherence. If you've written your process, you have a blueprint, somebody's responsible for looking at new documents and going, does this match our process? Yes or no? Is it easy to fix? Is it a coaching moment? And then execute that review cycle. Anything to add, Brendan, before we review the committee?
No, I really think that the key of what is not, it doesn't have to be that highest technical skill, but they do have to have a skill of gaining buy-in from the team. Because without the buy-in, the process adherence becomes difficult.
All right, so I'm going to be a little sensitive on this next slide, and it's because when Brendan and I were putting this together over the last month, I realized something, that we've only recently truly defined a documentation committee to the outside world. We've done it internally over and over again with our consulting clients, whether it's growth program clients or our process consulting clients, but we hadn't really spelled it out. And so we have recently, and then I realized that the application we have for this is for documenting client assets. So I'm going to show you that process first, and then we're just going to have an open discussion about how we can apply this to your general process library or your entire documentation system. So if you do have questions or thoughts, I would love to hear from you in the comments. And if you're watching this later, please throw a comment. We do watch those. I'm glad to weigh in and answer. We might get smarter for it. So documentation committee for client assets. I usually recommend 3 people on the committee. And that scales pretty well, meaning I don't think there's a whole lot of reason to add more as you get larger. Meetings are expensive, so I always should keep that in mind when we're talking about meetings. I love meetings, ask anybody. Leading that committee should be the Documentation Czar. They're the most familiar with the process, and the documentation review cycle. I like to have a key knowledge holder. This might be your high-end technician who knows the technical knowledge for client assets, so they know what's available and what's important. And then I like to have one of my lowest level technicians because they know what questions they're asking. Like, oh, I get this question all the time, or no one's ever asked me what the secondary IP address is of the WAN, right? I don't need that in my documentation. And that's how you create that back and forth, that push and pull needed to find the right thing. And I will show you how this process works here. Oh, yeah, the who. That's who they are. So I'm just going to show you all three parts at once. They have to determine first off what to document. So typically for client assets, the three of them have a quick discussion like, hey, we need to document pretty much everything. But we got to start somewhere. Where is that? So a lot of times people will try to pick a high impact area. I have seen examples of let's document all. My favorite example, this happened to me, was ISPs. Like, why was that so important? Well, because the on-call tech was getting a call 3 times a week at 3 a.m. And it's really hard at 3 a.m. to get your eyes open enough to figure out who the heck is their ISP, what's the circuit ID, how do we call this in? So they decided that was their highest impact, and they all agreed and they started doing it. So at that point, what you do is you ask what fields that we need to record that are necessary and sufficient. And this is simple, but not easy. Necessary and sufficient. Your tier 3 guys, you don't want to record everything until you remind them that he has to fill it out. So what I typically do is we have a rough agreement in the committee, and then I ask a champion, one person of my committee, hey, go document one of these and come back to us at the next meeting with your feedback. So they might come back like, hey, we need a more structured data field here. Hey, these 2 things are impossible to find, not worth the effort. And then I thought about adding this one thing afterwards. Can we do that? You discuss it. You refine the fields you're using. Again, necessary and sufficient. And then you roll it out a little bit further. You have the entire documentation committee go out and document one. Come back with their feedback. Try it out. Now notice part of this is a buy-in process, right? We're getting them involved. We're getting them feedback. So on this next meeting, after that feedback, we're going to do one more test phase, and we're going to roll it out to everybody who's involved in the company. Perhaps, again, in these examples, this is your tech team. And we're going to have everybody do one. It's not a lot of extra work. They do the one, and they come back with their feedback. And again, the committee digests that and figures out what's necessary and sufficient. So now everybody was involved on the process. They've had a chance to have an opinion. They've had a chance to have practice. What great way to get buy-in. As Brandon said, it's so critical to get this buy-in, and this process does that. Now, you might say, wow, if you're meeting weekly, that took 4 weeks to document one client asset to get it refined. You are correct. Starting takes time, but keep in mind that throughout this process, you can cover more than one item in your meetings. The way I usually do it is when I say stack your gains, what I mean is that maybe you've got the whole team testing in one client asset, while your documentation committee is actually one step behind the next asset, and your champion's one step behind in the previous asset. So you can probably get 3 or 4 rolling at one time and make great systematic progress. Now, what I'm going to pose to the public without a preconceived answer, and Brendan, I hope you can weigh in on this, is how could we apply this outside of client assets as well to talk about general processes like how to work service tickets? Maybe we have a PTO policy that's dictated by leadership, but maybe we can refine how that process works. How does a committee deal with that? Do you have ideas?
Yeah. So right now we are documenting our PSA, how to work tickets, how to escalate a ticket. So we understand what we need to document, which is the how. We've begun to roll out these processes and gain feedback. But while that first one is being rolled out, there are also 2 more that are right behind it. So when those are done, we're going to roll that out. It's that 4-week time frame seems like a lot, and the key here is to just get started.
Now, how would we introduce like a written process? Like we're in the middle of moving from ConnectWise to Halo right now. No shade on ConnectWise. It's an internal training exercise for us to eat our own dog food and some projects. But like, how would we put that into a documentation committee? It's for where it's a general process and not just a client asset. You still just pick one, I guess.
So you start with one. What's the most impactful? How to work.
Right. For a service team, absolutely.
So we documented how to work a ticket, but from that, we also needed to document the service boards, statuses, when and how to use. So we began to stack our gains here by here's the how to work a ticket, but oh wait, we need the knowledge base for the service boards and the statuses when to use. Within Halo, it was now we have actions. Now let's roll that out. So the next step often becomes very, very clear when you just start.
Yeah, so this is a great time to mention then one more companion piece to this, which is the process review meeting. We actually just had our process review meeting this morning. I recommend doing them weekly. They are typically super brief. We schedule 30 minutes and don't always take the whole time. So this is a great chance to tell you about a little tool. Almost every documentation platform I've experienced so far, that's Confluence, SharePoint, Google Drive, Hoodoo, ITDUG, all 5 of those, and probably many, many others, have the ability to log changes to documents, changes to SOPs, to at least an email address, if not directly to a hook to Slack or Teams. And both Slack and Teams, for example, can receive emails into a channel. I create a documentation channel. I actually ask everybody to mute that channel, have all its notifications go there, and then once a week we hop in, and our first agenda item on our process review meeting is let's review the channel. This morning we only had one change in our documentation review channel, but it was a massive change. Right? We actually spent most of the meeting talking about this one thing. Hey, this process is broken. We just learned something new about this process. We need to make some changes. Here's what I think is going on so far. So-and-so is going to go fix this one piece. So-and-so else is actually going to go test this process this week to make sure it works. And that's how we keep refining the process. Now, I'm curious how we can map this process review meeting into the documentation committee, or does that become the same meeting?
It becomes the same meeting. Right now, let's take a look right back at that review cycle. It's already been written. It's already been published. We're at stage 3 of receiving feedback. Once we receive that feedback and collect that feedback, we can do the review and the revisions in step 4 before republishing.
I could also see a place where, for example, I believe that in a service team, unless you're really, really large, everybody should be contributing to processes and do it live, right? We have ways to track changes these days and see what happened. We have our discernment if something's going to break something or not. So you could have your process review meeting with a larger team, and then things that percolate up could also be sent to your documentation committee, especially if you have a change management process in place to approve those changes. Would that work?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a lot of ways to skin this. I like it. Last chance for questions before we move into a wrap up. Any last thoughts, Brendan, on key points?
So key points, no, but I do want to give real life example.
Great.
I had a meeting this morning with a client, and we are implementing new processes. We have spent 4 weeks going over the process. What does the ideal process look like for them? The key is to get started here, because once you get started, this whole process review, the documentation committee, the buy-in from everybody else, you start to build that culture, and that Documentation Czar is the leader of the pack.
And even remember that what is our definition of documentation, right? It's a written agreement on what we're going to do, because we gave a lot of information to this client this morning about how this process can work, and they made some decisions about how it's going to work for them, and they wrote it down live. So when we meet with them next, we can go, okay, what did we decide last time? That's going to be in writing. There's no guessing. So we reviewed a lot of different options. That's going to make things flow so much smoother. Document as you go. All right. So if you were seeing this live, great. If you're seeing it recorded, also great. The best source to get all of these is we have a playlist called ITDUG. It's at youtube.com/Eureka Process. There's a lot of other great content is there. If we come up with some great ideas or resources, we tend to post them to YouTube first and then share them on social media. Would love to have you there. Please give it a subscribe QR code if you're feeling frisky, or just type in youtube.com/Eureka Process. If you prefer the written word, we also have the book, which explains the first chapter, what LBS is, very succinctly with picture graphics. So you can get that from Amazon.com. Again, that's process and the other P word, which is also process. I did find a shortcut. You can type in Alan Edwards process if you don't do QR codes like on the screen, and that'll pop up. And there's even an audiobook if you love the sound of my voice. I was a little creeped out the one time a guy landed for a trade show. I was like, yeah, listen to your audiobook twice on the way down. I'm like, oh, it feels personal. Do we know each other now? Always glad to share. So please, guys, reach out. Again, you can comment, subscribe, send us emails. We're always happy to answer. And I'm curious, Brendan, what's happening with ITDUG for the rest of the year?
All right. So we are going to not have an ITDUG webinar in November or December. November is Thanksgiving in the U.S. We've got Christmas in December on the fourth Wednesday. So we are going to pick up with our next webinar on January 22nd. And it's going to be regarding your compliance documentation. And I am bringing in a wonderful special guest, Leah Shalabad, who is phenomenal in the field.
Yeah, so I mean, if you didn't catch this, I went through the slides so quickly in the beginning. Brendan's also our compliance officer. We thought our GDPR project was going to take years. It's pretty close to complete in months, which has been amazing. And I had a chance to interview Leah on ITBODD. That's IT Business Owner Didn't Die. Episode 9, which currently is the last one out. So you'll see that playlist as well on our YouTube channel if you want to check it out and get to know Leah before she presents with us today, January.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us on our webinar. Alan, thank you for all of the phenomenal information. If you're not already subscribed, you're going to want to hit that bell button to get alerted when we post new topics, and hit the subscribe button while you're there if you like the content. You can visit us on Facebook group at facebook.com/group/ITDUG. We're also on Reddit, and you can find a variety of interesting informational information on this.
Always a pleasure to share, Brendan, and thank you too for your insights. I've always enjoyed having these conversations with you because I learned just as much from you.
Thank you so much. Everyone, have a phenomenal day, and hope to see you next time.